We're very happy to have Morris Miller, who is the CEO of Xenex, on today. And just a quick overview of Morris's biography. Under Morris Miller's leadership, Xenex has become a world leader in UV technology-based strategies and solutions. Through the use of powerful UV light and innovative hospital protocols, the company has helped hospitals achieve significant success within their facilities. Today, many of the world's leading hospitals, including Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, and Stanford Health, use Xenex's LightStrike robots as part of their comprehensive disinfection strategy. As CEO, Morris is responsible for the company's overall business strategy and oversight of day-to-day operations. Originally from San Antonio, Morris is a graduate of the Dedman School of Law at Southern Methodist University, the University of Texas at Austin, and Phillips Exeter Academy. He is the co-founder of Tectonic Ventures, which invests in and advises founders, startups, and established technology companies. Prior to co-founding Tectonic Ventures, Morris founded Sequel Ventures, LLC, and Cutstone Ventures, LLC, which invest in/act as advisors to numerous startups such as Inventables, Odometry, and Golfballs.com. Previously, Morris started Curtis Hill Publishing, the first company to publish Texas law on CD-ROM. He was also a co-founder of Rackspace Managed Hosting, where he acted as managing director and co-chairman. We're pleased to have Morris Miller on as our guest today. Good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the MedTech Business Academy podcast, hosted by the MedTech experts. This is a very special episode of the podcast, as we're honored to have the caliber of guests that we do today. It really is somebody who has an incredible inspiration story, and we think for most of our audience is going to be able to help move and hopefully provide some further guidance as to how to continuously find success in this challenging field and a challenging time that we live in. But having the right product with the right message and the right background obviously resonates. And that's what our guest has had the opportunity to do. So I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, Barbara Strain. Thank you, Barbara, for joining me today.
Hi, everyone.
And you've had an opportunity in the intro to hear a little bit of the background and the bio of our esteemed guest today. He is none other than Morris Miller. Morris, thank you for making the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So Morris, you're the co-founder of multiple venture capital firms, including Tectonic Ventures, Sequel Ventures, Cutstone Ventures. You've co-founded companies and paradigm-shifting industries like software with Rackspace and the publishing industry. And as if that wasn't impressive enough, okay? Now you approach in your latest venture in Xenex. And you had an opportunity to take Xenex to this whole other level. And it's really impressive when somebody that doesn't necessarily come up through healthcare or med tech to really find the passion to take something that really is so necessary and is a budding portion of what our industry needs, taking it to the next level. We're really excited to hear from you, Morris, and your inspiration story. So tell us, how does somebody that founds and is co-founder of a publishing company, a software company,
so
venture capital companies, how do you decide that you're all of a sudden going to become the CEO of a novel germ zapping company?
So I would say it's a little bit of luck and a lot of good fortune.
Okay.
My dad is a physician. So I've grown up around my dad and medicine. That means every Saturday and Sunday when my dad would go to the office and make rounds, I have 3 siblings. I would always raise my hand and say, I want to go to the hospital with you. And so I'd go to the hospital and sit in a writing room where they do the charting and experience it. And so I've always liked this area. And my dad always used to say, I don't know why, but he'd go, look, even if you don't become a physician, I think you're going to do things that affect patients and affect medicine. So that was the kind of seed planted as a young person that ended up becoming the case. When I met the founders of Xenex, Dr. Mark Stivic and Dr. Julie Stachowiak, these are both brilliant people. Mark went to Yale, has a PhD in epidemiology from Johns Hopkins. Julie went to Columbia, PhD in epidemiology from Johns Hopkins. They explained the problems that hospitals have with pathogens in these patient rooms and how the pathogens end up making patients sick. And one of the things that they would say is nobody goes to a hospital to get sick twice. And it just clicked. I'm like, wow, this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem that patients going into hospitals face, and they don't sometimes even know it.
So can you share with us a little bit, just for the audience who may not be as familiar with Xenex, can you share with us a little bit more about the Xenex solution, what you developed, where you found the co-founders, and to where you are now, if you would, please?
So Xenex manufactures the LightStrike germ zapping robot. It's the most powerful mobile UV robot used by healthcare facilities to reduce microbial pathogens on surfaces in those hospital rooms. There was actually an entrepreneur, a phenomenal entrepreneur named Brian Kruver, who introduced me to the founders. Brian is from Austin. And one of the first questions I ask in any business I get involved in is, what is your mission? What's your mission? And it's sort of instructive for your audience potentially. You know, when I met the founders of Rackspace, I said, what's your mission? And they kind of said, oh, have you ever heard Bill Gates say that there's going to be a computer on every desktop? And I said, yeah. And they go, well, every company is going to have multiple internet servers. And I said, oh, like web servers. And they go, no. Web is one application on the internet. They're going to have video servers, which is kind of what YouTube became. They're going to have email servers. And it's like, oh, in that instant, I'm like, okay, number one, they had a vision and a mission because they wanted to be the guys that would supply all of those companies with servers. And, 500,000 servers later, they were the biggest in the world. So even YouTube actually started at Rackspace, which most people don't have any idea. So their first, I think, 35 or 40 servers, they were at Rackspace. Similarly, in other companies, golfballs.com, you'd go, well, what does that have to do? And what's the guy's mission? And literally, if you met the CEO, Tom Cox, who's just Tom is now the chairman. He's a great guy. And the current CEO, Greg Palmer, is a phenomenal guy. And their mission is to make golf more fun. It's just to make golf more fun. And it doesn't matter how we think about it. It's all about that mission. And once you can pick up that mission, you can do it. So Mark and Julie sat in my office with Brian, and I said, okay, so what's your mission? And Julie looks at me and she goes, Morris, she goes, we have to stop. We have to eliminate the pathogens in the environment so that we can save the patient's lives, because these are deadly pathogens. I was like, okay, that is a mission I can get behind. And that's something that I would encourage every entrepreneur and every listener of your podcast. It's like, if you can't, the most important thing you can think about is, what are you doing on a mission basis? Like, even in our intro call, Barbara was talking about her experiences in healthcare. It's a driving mission, or you, in terms of your collaboration in this community of experts you're bringing together. You have to have a mission. That's what keeps people focused every single day.
Love it. So Xenex is a UV, and I'm trying to tiptoe around terms because I know there's some sensitivity
Yep.
in the new era here, but it is designed to kill germs. Can you just give it to the audience in blatant terms so I don't say the D word without?
Right. Well, since you're now on video, I'll actually I have two interesting props that I normally never get to use, but I'm going to show them.
Love it.
So traditionally, UV light was made by mercury lamps. And anybody that's like walked through hospitals, you might see these like kind of blue glowing light bulbs that point towards the ceilings. Those are mercury lamps. They've been around for 100 years. The thought that Mark and Julie had was that you could use a xenon lamp. And anybody that's into cars knows that xenon headlamps are a lot more intense than regular headlamps. And they're like, if you can pulse a xenon lamp in the exact right way, And this is using a microsecond of light. So a microsecond of energy that's stored at a capacitor, you can release it in that moment and put out the entire spectrum of UV light. So that was their innovation. And literally that is a Xenex UV lamp right there. So it's about 12 inches. And because it projects 360 degrees, we can raise the top of the robot, and maybe at some point y'all could show the listeners or viewers what the robot looks like. But you raise this lamp and you set this thing to go. And we always recommended running it for 5 minutes on the left side of the bed and then flipping everything in the room. And then 5 minutes on the right side of the bed. This is like remote controls, nurses' call buttons, anything that's in the room, because everything has two sides. We always recommended 5 minutes. When we went through, we'll talk later about FDA approval, they said, well, for most bacteria, you can run it for 2 minutes. We were very conservative. Possibly that's why we got.
Well, my microbiology background, I was excited. I told Morris when we were meeting earlier that this was going to be one of our highlights for me, is because one of the things that I've done over my whole career, besides all the value analysis stuff, is disinfection and working with infection prevention and control. So when these technologies came out and then they expanded, it was just exciting. So thanks for being on as our guest, and a little checkbox, my dream come true. My big question is, I know that there was, first you got a de novo, which is a wonderful way to really gain insights into how things were done and the way the information was collected, but it means something to providers to understand, because we have to know what those all are. So you'll probably tell us a little bit more about that. It came at a time, we all still talk about before COVID, during COVID, after COVID. So my question that will direct to the audience so that they would need to know is, they've either developed something before COVID and then had a hard time during COVID, or they developed something during COVID that was meant just for that. What's the long staying ability once sort of one of those episodes like we had over those years are kind of past us, at least the high? What is your advice to folks to how can they stay in the game if they have something that really was during that time? So how does Xenex do that? And you, from your experiences before?
So we had already grown. We're an evidence-based company, first of all. So even before COVID, we had approximately 57 peer-reviewed published studies from Stanford, or from Mayo Clinic and MD Anderson and a lot of other institutions, really supporting what we would say. And basically, we would never say anything about our pre-FDA product until it had been proven in a study. So the first thing for your listeners is prove it in a study and make sure it's peer-reviewed. Don't compensate the institution that's doing it, because it undermines the credibility of what they're writing. And that's how we felt about it. So we tried to eliminate as much conflicts as we can. So we were willing to give them Petri dishes. We're willing to loan them our robot, but that's it. So like even MD Anderson, they ran their study and they showed that it was 20 times, the room was 20 times less pathogenic using Xenex than after housekeeping. And that's when I was like, whoa. And then they ran a series of 26 rooms where they did zero housekeeping, and it was still 20 times less pathogenic. And that's where I was like, okay. Now, as an expert in microbiology, the answer is clear after the fact that most chemistry that's used to get rid of pathogens requires a 5-minute or a 9-minute dwell time. And literally the housekeepers are going in and they're taking their towel and they're wiping it on the surface. It might be in contact with a wet surface for, 20 seconds, if you're lucky for a minute. That is not enough time for the cleaning product to do what it's supposed to do. Because we're running the LightStrike robot for a prescribed amount of time, we're able to do it. So we had already made the company profitable before COVID. During COVID, it grew like crazy. We picked up a lot of customers, and it became even bigger. And then after COVID, people lost, and when I say people, I mean hospitals and healthcare institutions sort of lost their focus. And it's our job now to go back, just like we did before COVID, and say, hey, this was a huge issue before COVID, fighting things like MRSA, C. diff, Clostridiosis difficile, Acinetobacter, and many, many other pathogens. It should still be your priority. I think they had a lot of budget issues during COVID and just after COVID. And based upon the profit reports that I've seen coming from, Tenet and HCA, they've now got plenty of money. They've kind of figured it out again, and they're back into the normal course of business. So for your viewers and listeners, stick it out. The market will get better. And again, if you're mission driven, you can't stop because it's too important, and you're doing the work for the patients that if they knew, they would want you to do it for them.
So Morris, I love that story. The concern that I always have in our industry, and it's always eye-opening for those that aren't from the industry, is that the greatest challenges that any organization faces is those faced by inertia and indifference. And you just referenced this is how we've always done it. We spray the cloth, somebody goes in, they wipe the bed rail, they wipe the bed, and it's disinfected. And now you're trying to showcase for them a different way. How did you go about that? Because that's one of the challenges that so much of our audience has, is overcoming this is how we've always done it. This works, even though it doesn't always work, right? They just think it does, but it's that inertia, it's that indifference. How did you work to overcome that?
So the first step is having a peer-reviewed study that proves it. We were pleased when MD Anderson published their study in March of 2011. I told the founders, I'm like, all right, take back the robots. And the founders said, well, wait, when somebody proves that it works, you kind of leave the robots with them to allow them to do consistent testing. And I just said, look, if they don't buy the robots after proving that the room is 20 times less pathogenic, then they don't believe their own research, and nobody else should either. And thank God they bought one, and then they bought three, and then they bought seven, and they're still our customer to this day. So one is proof in a study and proving product market fit. Second thing is, we've never just dropped off a robot and left. Every time we go to a customer, we work with them, we implement it, we monitor it. So all of our robots report back. Hospitals don't like reporting. They don't like you plugging into their Wi-Fi networks. So we were like, okay, we'll put modems, basically cell phones in every single robot that upload a different way to take. So it's about taking the friction out of the process. And then you actually have to want to see them succeed. And those are the two things, I guess, for your listeners. If they're really not passionate about it, they don't have a mission. And if they're not dead set on making sure a customer succeeds versus just trying to go sell another customer, I would just say, look, no harm. Either get the technology into somebody's hands who does care, or move on to the next idea. But this is not a sell it and then you're out of there. We talk to our customers all the time, even to this day, on existing long-term programs, to think about how can they make it better? How can they do better? How can we monitor? What are we seeing from the portal? We're better at interpreting information than they are. And so that's what we do. And really, to Barbara's point, sometimes new customers, I guess this is the answer to your question, Skinder. Sometimes customers, even with 57 peer-reviewed published studies, they say, well, I don't know, because you're not FDA authorized. And eventually we're like, okay, this is a huge expense, millions of dollars, lots of time. We want to make it abundantly clear that whatever claims we're making, they are going to be on a label, and they've been validated by the FDA. And even coming up on a year anniversary of our FDA authorization, no other company has a product that's authorized for doing microbial reduction, is what the FDA, what that de novo term is. in the healthcare environment in the presence of hospital equipment. And we're proud of that. And we like to tout it. And we tell people, if anybody's approaching you and trying to sell you something, it's illegal. They can't. It's a adulterated device and it's misbranded. They've got to go through the same proof. And the last point on this is that there were many companies, and some of them are still out there saying, oh, we can disinfect a room in 17 seconds. Not possible. As a microbiologist, Barbara can go, that is not possible. And like I said, conservatively, we thought it was 4 minutes or 5 minutes. It actually ended up being 2 minutes.
So I want to come back to that because there's a lot packed in that. And one of the things that I know is going to be most endearing to our audience is you said it's been roughly a year. You dated it for the FDA approval. So I'm just going to do a timeline. I don't have magic fingers. Let's just all use our mental mind here to figure out what this imagery looks like. But the product, 2011, MD Anderson, do your first study. A year from prior to today is 2023. Okay, so you went this gap of time without having an FDA approved process, an FDA approved product. And at that point, you said, we want to pursue that for the microbial reduction indication, especially when you're in a crowded field where nobody else has it. That's a big undertaking. I mean, the average FDA investment is $2.5 million to $5 million. Not a small number. It's in a massive undertaking of resources, time, effort, et cetera. But you chose to go this route. Now, whether the FDA asked you to or whatever it is, it was still something that the rest of your cohort hasn't. How did you approach that process?
So the product was initially governed by the EPA. So we were allowed to sell it because we were registered with the EPA. The EPA doesn't monitor your claims. So we were very strict about, here's the study. This proved that the 5 minutes worked. Okay, now we can talk about 5 minutes. Up until then, if you were in a sales meeting with us with MD Anderson, they said, how long do you think it's going to take? And we'd say, we believe it's 5 minutes, but we have to run the study and then we'll be able to tell you, right? And like we did a study years later with MD Anderson in the operating rooms because we were getting a lot of requests for that. And MD Anderson ran the study and they said, look, if you'll put the robot where the anesthesiologist stands at the head of the bed after surgery and before the next patient comes in, you can get a statistically significant reduction in pathogen load that's worth doing. That was their number. And once they did it and once they published it, that's when we said, okay, here's a new protocol. The FDA was watching what was happening. I think I can't really speak for the FDA, but I think they felt very comfortable with our judicious use of numbers. And as an evidence-based company, any question they ask, I could point to a study. That's what made it the right time to interact with the FDA. That really started, it really began in about 2017, and it takes a long time to kind of get things really in high gear. It went into high gear towards the end of COVID in 2020. So that was a good 3-year period of time. High energy, high focus, high expense, as you said. And we just wanted to set the record straight with every hospital so they don't have to question, here's your evidence. And, if anybody else wants to say it, bring it on. But we'll, clearly they won't have 17-second run times. But when they've run studies, it's been 25 and 52 minutes. That equates to our traditional old robot, 2 minutes now and 5 minutes.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things that you really said, and I like how Skinder held up his hands and did his timeline thing, is that it's persevering because you know that there's a patient and that mission at the end, and that you just don't put it in a corner because it's just going to take too long, that sort of thing. So it's a great lesson for the audience. And I'm wondering, are there any other key lessons in general that if you had to do 1, 2, and 3 that any new or even a company that's well established, but they want to change something or thing, is there any key advice to give our audience based on your experience total?
To me, it's like you can't train people to have passion. So you have to hire passionate people. And that's really my number one thing. And you know it, it's like y'all are energy givers, right? If you're meeting with somebody and you're like, man, I feel fired up. Okay, you should consider hiring that person if they have the right expertise. And if it's the opposite, you need to move on. And you can give them some help if you want, but it's like you need passionate people that really care about the problem. And then hopefully you have a technology that, if the founders had told me, well, this is twice as good as mercury light bulbs, I would have been like, guys, that's a heavy lift for something that's, twice as good. When it's 4,000 times more intense, okay, that's a completely different thing. And when instead of it being a single wavelength of light, it's broad spectrum, okay, you're getting the entire germicidal spectrum. Similarly, when COVID hit, I talked to the founder and I said, we need to go test against this because I don't want to make claims unless we know we can affect it. So we were literally the first company in the world, to announce our results. It took us about 4 weeks for a BSL 4 level lab to get actual SARS-CoV-2. It took them about 5 weeks to grow it out because it's very hard to grow out some viruses. And then when they finally, Larry, when he finally called me, he goes, okay, we're ready for you to deliver the robot, but we don't know how dangerous this pathogen is. So you're going to deliver the robot. We'll test it. You're not getting your robot back for over a year because we're going to quarantine it and we're going to disinfect it with another one of your robots. And then we'll let them both sit in quarantine until this whole thing, is over. And we were like, okay, because that's how adamant we are about, we want the real evidence. And at that time, with the non-FDA version, we announced it can kill SARS-CoV-2 in 1 meter in less than 1 minute. Like, okay, that was it. And we knew it as a fact, as opposed to, well, we predict like this. So it's really discipline, and that's one of the best things about the founders.
Love that.
They have a lot of great things about them.
I want to build on something because I always find it so unique when it comes to this particular sector. So many organizations think about quote unquote the sale, and they view the sale as the end. Somebody says they're going to buy a robot, and then that is the end of their means. But in so much of what we do in this industry, that is only a stage in the means to the end process. And your product, the robot, is particularly one of those areas. And the reason why I say that is I believe in, again, I'm over categorizing, over simplifying here, but so much of what you're probably doing is you're speaking to infection prevention, you're speaking to supply chain, and then yet it's somebody that's likely so remote that is responsible for the compliance of the use of this product. And typically it's EVS. And I think that's where so many companies struggle in our industry is they say, okay, great, MD Anderson bought one, but there's a compliance factor to make sure that it's being used. And the compliance teams aren't always at the table in the decision-making process. So tell me, how do you get to a place where you get MD Anderson to buy 1, 7, 10, whatever it may be and the like, but you're involving all those people so you get actual adoption and compliance? How have you overcome that?
So this robot gets moved room to room, and we know that that's done by the environmental service workers. Sometimes it's done by some of the nurses, but typically environmental services. There isn't a single hospital of our over 1,200 hospitals where we haven't gone in and trained all 3 shifts of environmental service workers and infection preventionists and nurses on the ICU to understand not only how to deploy it, but also why it's important to deploy it and what they should be doing with it. So it's a huge, heavy lift. And look, sometimes there's turnover in environmental services staff, and you would go, well, that's not your responsibility. That is our responsibility. And so we go back in and we will retrain, and we'll do it over and over to make sure they feel comfortable using it.
I think
Well
that's
said.
one of the most overlooked pieces, but you're injecting passion into somebody that doesn't always see themselves as part of the process. It's really unique. No, thank you for sharing that. Barbara, do you have any other questions for Morris as we start to get to our wrap up here?
I really don't have any other questions. I mean, I'll do my little tiny wrap up here you gave me the microphone, so you don't get it back for a minute or two. But the main things are, and you said things that just make my value analysis heart sing and my microbiology, be stimulated. But I think the things you said, and I actually wrote down number 3, because you actually said the top 3 is that passion and then the discipline, but then it's really knowing the end users. And I wanted to make sure our audience understood that. But the key thing you said ages ago at the first of this is evidence-based. And a lot of folks that I know that Skinder and I talked to, well, we don't really have any evidence. And so I said, okay, let's go drag it out of your data and things. You've got to have it somewhere. And if not, you need to get it. So I think you've said all of the things that we know can make things very successful. And it's just not about, commissions and how much profit am I going to make or whatever. You went right to the heart of it. So thank you, Morris.
Sure.
And Morris, I'll give you the last word. I'll just provide my wrap up. In Barbara's world of value analysis, there's a key principle, and I think so many people fumble on it and make it more complex than it needs to be. But really, it comes down to CFO, clinical, financial, and operational. And through this discussion, you've really hit upon that clinical, the evidence, the all the things that you did with MD Anderson in the early days to say, let's show you that it works. The financial and collecting the data and showcasing the value that it brings, even to the EVS personnel, and all the life savings. And I'm sure there's dollar context in some way, shape, or form that gets associated with that. And then operational, showing them how easy it is to use and how compliance makes such a major difference. So really, I find it just so what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiring that somebody, and I don't even know if you were aiming to do the CFO dynamic in that formality, but clearly you've done so in a way that is just natural to you, natural to the organization. And we appreciate you kind of sharing your insights, your passion story, and it's easy to see why you've had such success. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. And with that, pass to you the final word, Morris.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank both of you. Outside my office, literally, if you walk outside my door, just turn left, I keep a digital board. And so we've now run the robot approximately 45 million times, 45 million. And on every day, I can see during the day what the usage count is and why. And, one of the things that we try to do with the hospitals is to have them compete. Who can run the robot most? And it doesn't matter to me in terms of, if anything, I provide them with the bulbs. So if they run it more, in theory, it's going to use more bulbs and it's more expensive for me. And yet the goal is to have them use it as much as they can and compete within their own teams and then compete with other hospitals to provide that level of excellence. These monthly compliance reports will set goals with them. I think, Skinder, y'all know that, what you measure gets done. Yep. And we're very serious about that. There are 1,200 hospitals that have it. There's probably 30,000 around the world that don't. And my team knows we're not done until every single room, when it's discharged, a LightStrike robot is brought in, the pathogen load is brought down by 20 times, and that next patient can feel really good about entering the room. So as excited as I am about what they've accomplished, there's a huge long way to go around the world. And that's what we're set on seeing happen. And, even Microsoft or Dell Computer, were not built overnight, and it just takes time.
Morris, your passion is contagious. I want to go out right now and invent something and change the world. I'm going to try to figure out a way to do that. But again, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for all that you've shared. We very much appreciate it. Thank you for introducing this technology to the world, as it's really so important to all of us as patients.
Great. Well, thank you for having me today.
Thank you.